I didn't recognize him at first, until he stood at the head of the table and bought the company I built to survive without him.
I always arrived at meetings earlier than everyone else. Not because I was afraid of being late, I simply loved the moment of silence when the room was still empty and the city beyond the panoramic windows was only beginning to wake up. In those moments, it felt like everything I had achieved truly belonged to me. The company, the contracts, the name people had begun to respect. I built all of it myself, after I left, after I stopped being someone's weakness. I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. Today's meeting was supposed to be a formality, signing the agreement, final numbers, standard questions. The new investor everyone had been talking about for weeks was expected to appear in person. I didn't know his name, and to be honest, I didn't want to. As the board members began to enter the room, I smiled out of habit, nodding and exchanging brief remarks. Everything was going according to plan. Almost. "Is he here already?" someone asked. "Yes," the CFO replied. "He prefers not to be late." I lifted my gaze at the exact moment the boardroom door opened again, and the world I had spent so long piecing back together cracked. He walked in calmly, confidently, as if he had always known this place belonged to him. A dark suit, a perfect fit, that familiar posture. I didn't recognize him right away. First, it was the way he walked, then the way he stopped by the table, taking his time before choosing a seat. Several seconds passed before I realized I couldn't breathe. Damian. His name flashed through my mind like a pain you learn to live with, but that never truly disappears. He had changed, more mature, harder, colder, and yet something about him remained the same, the very thing I once couldn't protect myself from. He looked at me, didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. "Good morning," he said, evenly, professionally. "I apologize for being late." No one noticed my fingers tremble. No one but me heard something snap inside. "I think we can begin," he continued, and took his seat at the head of the table. At the head of my table. The words of the meeting reached me as if through water. Numbers, percentages, legal terms, all of it faded into the background behind one single sensation. The past I had run from had just bought my present. "The deal will be finalized today," Damian said. "I'm pleased that we'll be working together now." Working together. I forced myself to lift my gaze and meet his eyes. In that moment, he froze, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough for me to understand. He recognized me, and what flickered in his eyes wasn't surprise. It was interest. "Adeline," he said my name slowly as if tasting it. "You've done an impressive job. The company is remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "I'm glad it caught your attention." He smiled, too confident. "Believe me," he said, "I'm interested in far more than just business." Silence fell over the boardroom, and suddenly I understood. He hadn't returned by accident. The only question was whether he knew what exactly he would find when he opened that door. After the meeting, I was the last one to leave the boardroom. I needed a few seconds of silence to put myself back together. My heart was beating too fast, my breathing uneven, and it irritated me. I had spent too many years learning how to stay calm to let one man destroy it in 5 minutes. When I stepped into the corridor, he was already there. Standing by the panoramic window, his back turned toward me, phone in his hand. Calm, confident, as if he knew I wouldn't walk past him, as if this moment wasn't accidental, but part of a carefully planned scenario. "Adeline," he said without turning around, "you always had a habit of leaving without a word." I stopped. "And you always had a habit of thinking the world would wait until you decided to turn around," I replied. He smiled and finally looked at me. His gaze was attentive, too attentive, the kind you couldn't hide from.
"You're holding up remarkably well," Damian said, "if one didn't know that we were acquainted." "Are we?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid you're mistaken." He took a step closer, not crossing the line, just enough for me to feel his presence. "You changed your last name," he said calmly, "the city, the company, your style, but not your eyes." That was the first strike. "You should be more careful with statements like that," I said. "In the business world, they can be misunderstood." "I understand the business world," he replied, "but that's not what I'm talking about right now." Employees passed by. Someone greeted us. Someone smiled. From the outside, we looked like two partners discussing work matters. No one could see the tension hidden between the lines.
"Why are you here?" I asked quietly. "Why do you want my company?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person. "Because it has potential," he said, "and because you managed to do the impossible." "That's not an answer." "It's the most honest one." He paused. "But you still haven't answered my question." "I don't have to." "You do," he replied softly, "at least to yourself." I felt irritation rising inside me, not fear, not pain, irritation, because he still knew how to invade my space. "You bought the company," I said, "not me. Let's keep that boundary." His smile widened slightly. "Boundaries are a conditional thing," he said, "especially when the past suddenly becomes the present." I took a step back. "If that's all," I said, "I have work to do." "Of course," he replied. "I won't keep you long." He looked straight into my eyes. "Just tell me one thing," he began. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you?" I didn't answer. I walked past him without turning around. Every step required effort, but I didn't allow myself to hurry. Only when the elevator doors closed did I finally exhale. Because in one thing, he was right. I truly believed that the past would never be able to find me.
All day long, I kept catching myself thinking about anything but work. Documents lay in front of me, emails kept coming one after another, employees asked questions, yet inside there was a strange, sticky feeling, as if I were no longer living in the present, but back in the past I had worked so hard to lock away. He was here, in the same building, in my life. I left later than usual, on purpose. I hoped that by then he would already be gone. But when the elevator doors opened, I realized I was wrong again.
"You always run," he said quietly. I flinched, but didn't turn around. "I'm not running," I replied. "I'm just moving forward." "Without explanations?" He stepped closer. "Like you did back then?" I finally turned to face him. We were standing too close, close enough for me to feel him again, his scent, his warmth, that familiar sensation that once made me lose my balance. And that frightened me more than anything now. "We agreed not to talk about the past," I said. "I never agreed," Damian replied. "You just disappeared." Those words hit harder than I expected. "You left," he continued, "without a call, without a message, without an explanation. I looked for you." I clenched my fingers. "You shouldn't," I said. "Not now." "Then when?" For the first time, sharpness cut through his voice. "When you decide it's time?"
I turned away,
taking a step toward the exit. "You don't know everything," I said quietly, "and you didn't know it back then." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no arrogance in his eyes, only pain. "Do you know what I did know?" he asked. "I knew I loved you, and that turned out to be not enough." I froze. Something tightened inside me, because it was true, and because back then, everything had been far more complicated than he could have imagined. "You chose your path," I said at last, "and I chose mine." "I chose us," he said sharply, "and you decided for both of us." I lifted my gaze to him. "Sometimes," I said, "love isn't the most important thing." He looked at me for a long time, in silence, as if trying to see the woman I used to be. "You've changed," he finally said, "because otherwise I wouldn't have survived." Silence settled between us, heavy, full of everything left unsaid. "I'm not leaving Adeline," he said. "Not the company, not your life, not until I know the truth." My heart skipped a beat. "You're not ready to hear it," I said. "And you're not ready to tell it," he replied. I walked away first. But for the first time in all these years, I knew one thing for certain. Running would no longer work. Because if he learns the truth, it won't just change our past, it will change someone's life in the present.
I barely slept that night. My thoughts kept returning to the place I had forbidden them to go for years, to the days when everything was still fragile, unstable but real, to the moment when a single conversation could have changed everything, and yet it never happened. In the morning, I arrived earlier than usual. I needed space, air, silence, but just like before, reality had no intention of adjusting itself to my wishes. "You're avoiding me," Damian said. I lifted my head. He was standing in the doorway of my office, not bothering to ask for permission to come in, just like always. "I'm working," I replied calmly. "So are you." "No," he shook his head. "You're hiding." I smiled faintly. "Is that your favorite version of events?" I asked. "The one where you're the victim?" He didn't answer right away. He walked across the room and stopped by the window. "There's one thing I don't understand," he finally said. "You disappeared at the exact moment when everything could have been different." My heart tightened. "Do you really think," I said slowly, "that I had a choice back then?" He turned toward me sharply. "There's always a choice." "No," I replied. "Sometimes there are only consequences." I stood up from my desk. I didn't want to sit anymore. I didn't want to look like I was defending myself. "You chose your career, deals, flights, endless promises of later. I waited. I believed. I stayed silent." "I was building a future," he snapped. "Our future." "You were building yours," I said, "and I was left alone in my present." He stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Why did you just leave?" I closed my eyes. Because back then, if I had told him, he would have stayed, and he would have hated me for it. "Because I knew," I said out loud, "that you would choose not me." He looked at me for a long time, far too long. "You were wrong," he finally said. "No," I shook my head, "I knew you." The room fell silent. "You took away my right to decide," he said. "And you took away my sense of certainty," I replied. "We both did what we knew how to do." He turned away. "So that's it?" he asked. "Just fear?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "It was something more." "What?" I felt panic rising inside me, sharp and familiar. "If you learn the truth," I said, "you'll understand that I didn't leave you back then." He stiffened. "Then what did you leave?"
I said nothing, because the answer to that question could destroy everything we were trying to hold together. I realized that it couldn't go on like this anymore. Every day spent in half-truths pressed heavier than years of silence. I had learned how to live with a secret, but I wasn't ready to look into his eyes again and pretend that there was nothing between us except business and old resentments. That evening, I didn't go home. I rented a room at a small hotel in the city center, not luxurious but cozy. I needed a place where I could be alone with myself, where the walls didn't remember the past, where I could make a decision I had been running from for far too long. I stood under the shower for a long time, letting the water wash away the tension of the past few days. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. When did I become so grown up? When did I stop hoping? And when did fear become stronger than love? My phone vibrated. A message from Damian. "We need to talk, not at the office." I closed my eyes. "All right," I replied a few seconds later. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you where." He didn't ask any questions. It felt like trust, or like his last attempt to get it back. The next day, I arrived before him. The cafe was almost empty. Large windows, soft light, quiet music. I chose a table against the wall, my back to the room, an old habit I had never quite broken. When he walked in, I felt it immediately. He had changed, or maybe it was the way I saw him now. The easy confidence that once irritated me was gone. He looked at me carefully, cautiously. "You look different," he said as he sat down across from me. "I am different," I replied. A pause settled between us. "You said you wanted the truth," I finally said. "But I need to know, if I tell you, will you be able to live with it?" He frowned. "I'm already living without it," he replied. "And that's worse." I clenched my fingers beneath the table. "Then listen," I said quietly, "and don't interrupt." I told him about that night, about the conversation that turned everything upside down, about fear, about how quickly happiness can become a trap when you realize you're completely alone. He said nothing. And the longer he stayed silent, the more frightened I became. "Did you think I wouldn't be able to handle it?" he finally asked. "I knew you would be torn apart," I answered, "between duty and something you never planned." He lowered his gaze. "You took away my chance," he said. "I was trying to save us both," I whispered. He lifted his head. "Then tell me," his voice dropped, "what exactly were you hiding?" I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like he could hear it too. "I left because I knew that if I stayed, it wouldn't just change my life." He froze. "What are you talking about?" I looked straight into his eyes. "About someone," I said. "Someone who appeared after that night." He went pale. "You're saying that—" I didn't finish the sentence, because sometimes a single pause says more than any confession ever could. I stayed silent for only a few seconds, but they felt like an eternity. Sometimes a confession isn't made of words. It's the moment when you decide to stop hiding. "His name's Mark," I said quietly. "He's 4 years old." Damian didn't understand right away. I could see it in his eyes, as if he were trying to put the picture together, unable to believe that one missing piece could change everything. He started, then stopped. "You're saying that—" I nodded. He leaned back in his chair, ran a hand over his face. For the first time in all this time, there was no control in him, no confidence, only shock. "Is he mine?" he finally asked. I didn't answer at once. "Yes," I said, "he's yours." The world between us collapsed and then began to rebuild itself in a different shape. "Why?" His voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me back then?"
Because you were standing on the edge of the biggest deal of your life, I answered. Because you were ready to leave. Because I knew that if I told you, you would stay. Not because you wanted to, but because you would feel you had to. He looked at me without looking away. You decided for me, he said quietly. Yes, I answered honestly, because back then I wasn't alone anymore, and I had to think not only about us. He closed his eyes. 4 years, he said. 4 years of my life. I didn't ask you to come back, I said. I didn't look for you. I didn't wait. I just lived and raised him. Alone? Yes. He stayed silent for a long time. I want to see him, he finally said. This isn't a condition, he continued, and it's not a demand. It's a request. I looked at him carefully. He doesn't know about you, I said. For him, you're still just a name. Then I'll be patient, he replied, as long as it takes. We left the cafe together. Outside, it was warm. The evening city lived its own life, indifferent, noisy, real. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said when we stopped. I'm asking you to give me a chance to be there, not as an investor, not as the past, but as a father, and maybe as a man who still loves you. I looked at him for a long time. I don't know how all this will end, I said. He nodded. Neither do I. But for the first time in a long while, I don't want to run away. I smiled. Softly, honestly. Sometimes happiness isn't allowed forever. Sometimes it's a quiet, let's try. And that was enough. A week later, Mark asked, Mom, will that man stay with us? I looked at Damian. He was sitting on the floor building a construction set, trying to simply be there. If you allow it, I answered. Mark smiled. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not love that comes back, but a family that appears where no one expected it anymore.